She arrived like a shadow, carrying a past she wanted to forget. But the house where she hoped to start over held secrets even darker than hers. And when the old ghosts began to whisper, she realized nothing there was what it seemed. Welcome to the channel. Before we begin, like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this one. For years, Ethan Morgan Walker, the blind heir to one of the most influential families in Boston, lived relegated to the shadows, while his younger brother, Sebastian, occupied the place that traditionally belonged to him. The Morgan Walker family, owners of one of the most important textile companies in the country, had silently decided that a blind firstborn could not represent the future of their empire. The main hall of the family estate in Newport glittered that night. It was the 60th anniversary of the Morgan Foundation, the charitable organization created by the patriarch William Morgan. As always, Ethan remained discreetly in a corner, listening to conversations, identifying people by their voices, by the scent of their perfumes, by the cadence of their steps on the Italian marble. "Ethan, are you comfortable here?" asked Margaret, his mother, with that condescending tone he so detested. "Sebastian is making the new project announcement in a few minutes." "I'm perfectly fine, Mother," he replied, gently touching the arm of his personal assistant, Jackson, who accompanied him everywhere. "I prefer to stay here." At 35, Ethan had learned to live on the margins of his own family. Since he lost his sight at 12 due to a rare genetic disease, his name was carefully removed from any important family responsibility. It wasn't explicit cruelty. It was a cold pragmatism that had settled like a second skin in the Morgan dynasty. Sebastian, 3 years younger than him, had been meticulously molded to occupy the symbolic throne that tradition reserved for the firstborn. Charismatic, handsome, with a Harvard degree and an innate facility for business, Sebastian was everything. The family wanted to project to the outside world. Ethan took a sip of his champagne while listening from a distance to his brother's confident voice, announcing the foundation's expansion towards educational projects in rural Georgia. The applause was immediate. Beside him, he perceived a movement, someone approaching. "Excuse me, do you mind if I sit here?" asked a female voice, soft but firm. "These events always seem overwhelming to me." "Of course," replied Ethan, intrigued by that voice he didn't recognize among the usual ones in his family's social circles. "My name is Victoria Sanders," she introduced herself. "I'm a literature professor at Boston University, and I'm here representing the Humanities Department. Your foundation just approved a scholarship for our students." Ethan smiled. It wasn't common for someone to introduce themselves directly, without mentioning their last name or lineage, as if these were more important letters of introduction than the person themselves. "Ethan Morgan Walker," he responded, extending his hand in the direction of the voice. "I know who you are," said Victoria, shaking his hand firmly. "I've read your articles on contemporary American poetry. They're brilliant." Ethan was surprised. Few knew of his academic publications under a pseudonym. It was his small act of rebellion, his way of existing outside the family shadow. "How?" he began to ask. "Your style is unmistakable," she explained. "Besides, in your last essay on Robert Frost, you mentioned a sensory experience related to vision loss that I found revealing." I connected the dots. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt that someone really saw him. Not the blind heir, not the relegated brother, but the man who had built a rich and complex inner world behind those eyes that could no longer see. The conversation flowed with surprising naturalness. Victoria described the paintings decorating the hall, but not as others usually did, limiting themselves to colors and shapes. She told him about the emotions they conveyed to her, the visual, textures, how light fell on them from different angles. It was as if she translated the visual language into one he could feel. "My brother is looking over here," commented Ethan, perceiving a subtle change in the atmosphere. "Yes, with a look of puzzlement," confirmed Victoria. "I suppose it's not usual for the older brother of the great Sebastian Morgan to be conversing animatedly with a simple university professor." There was a certain irony in her voice, but also a refreshing honesty that Ethan found almost addictive after a lifetime among measured words and calculated conversations. My family has very clear ideas about who we should associate with, explained Ethan. Especially when it comes to women. Oh, I understand I don't fit the profile of potential partners for a Morgan Walker, right? Victoria laughed. Too simple, too academic, too normal. Too interesting, he corrected, smiling. And that's dangerous for the delicate family balance. As the night progressed, Ethan discovered that Victoria was not only intelligent and articulate, but possessed extraordinary sensitivity. She didn't treat him with the disguised pity he usually perceived in others. She spoke to him as an equal, challenging him intellectually, asking questions no one else dared to formulate. "Have you ever thought about reclaiming your place in the family business?" she asked at one point. "After all, you are the firstborn." The question fell like a stone in still waters. No one, not even himself, had dared to raise that possibility aloud. "There are certain realities one learns to accept," replied Ethan, slightly tensing his jaw. "My family decided long ago that Sebastian was the more viable option. And you accepted it just like that. Sometimes, Miss Sanders, true rebellion consists of finding one's own spaces away from the noise," replied Ethan. But something in Victoria's question had stirred something deep within him, something he thought dormant. The evening continued, and to the surprise of many, including Ethan himself, he and Victoria remained conversing in their corner for hours, oblivious to the bustle of the party, the curious glances, and eventually the whispers that began to circulate among the guests. When the time came to say goodbye, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He made an impulsive decision. "I'd like to continue our conversation about frost and the poetry of the senses," he said, handing Victoria a card. "My personal number is there. Few people have it." Victoria took the card, and for an instant her fingers brushed against Ethan's. "It will be a pleasure, Mr. Morgan," she replied, and Ethan could perceive a smile in her voice. After all, the best conversations always happen. In the margins, don't you think? As Jackson guided him to the family car, Ethan felt a strange mixture of anxiety and hope. For the first time in many years, something had changed in the carefully written script of his life. And that something had a name. Victoria Sanders, the literature professor who had seen in him what no one else had bothered to look for. The following weeks transformed Ethan's life in ways he could never have imagined. What began as casual meetings in downtown cafes to discuss literature soon turned into long walks through Boston Common, where Victoria described in detail the changing colors of the sunset over the lake. "The sky right now is like a canvas, where someone spilled intense orange inks that gradually dilute into purples and blues," she would describe as they walked through the park. "There are clouds that look like brush strokes, thin and elongated, reflecting the last golden glow of the sun." Ethan smiled, creating mental images from her words. It had been years since anyone had taken the time to describe the world to him with such detail and emotion. "Your voice makes me see more clearly than when I had sight," he confessed one afternoon, as they sat on a bench near the historic monument. Victoria remained silent for a moment before responding. "Most people with sight don't actually observe the world, Ethan. They look, but they don't see." As they got to know each other better, Ethan discovered that Victoria was much more complex than he had imagined. The only child of a university professor and a social activist, she had grown up in an intellectual but modest environment in Maine. Her beauty didn't fit the traditional canons, so valued by Boston high society. Her angular face with pronounced cheekbones and an intense gaze disconcerted those who expected the softness and docility typically associated with feminine beauty in the Morgan social circles. "My appearance has always been a subject of debate," she told him during one of their many conversations. "Too serious, too intense, too uncomfortable for others. My director at the university once suggested I soften my image to get a promotion." "And what did you do?" asked Ethan, fascinated. "I published 3 academic articles in international journals that same month," Victoria replied with a little laugh. "I told him I preferred to let my work speak for me." Ethan admired that determination, so similar to his own when he decided to publish under a pseudonym so that his ideas would be judged on their merit and not by the pity his condition might arouse. For 2 months their meetings remained a well-kept secret. Sebastian was busy with an international tour promoting the Foundation's projects, and Ethan's parents barely paid attention to his movements, accustomed to his discretion and autonomy within the permitted confines. It was during a private dinner at a small restaurant in Cambridge that Ethan finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "Victoria," he said after a moment of silence, "would you like to accompany me to the annual gala at the National Museum? My family has always been a sponsor, and—" "Are you sure?" she interrupted, with a tone that mixed surprise and caution. "That would mean officially introducing me to your social circle, to your family." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm tired of living in the shadows, Victoria. For the first time in my life, I feel that someone really sees me, and I want others to see that too." Victoria's hand found his on the table, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Your family won't accept me easily," she warned. "I'm not what they expect for the firstborn of the Morgan Walkers, even if that firstborn has been relegated." "Precisely for that reason," Ethan replied with a determined smile. "It's time for all of us to wake up from this carefully orchestrated fantasy. I didn't choose to lose my sight, but I can choose who I share my life with." The news that Ethan Morgan Walker would attend the gala with a companion caused a stir among the staff of the family mansion. Jackson, his faithful assistant, couldn't help but express his concern as he helped Ethan prepare for the event. "Sir, Mr. William has asked 3 times about the details of your guest," he commented while adjusting the bow tie of his tuxedo. "Mrs. Margaret seems uneasy." "I can imagine," Ethan replied calmly. "The uncertainty must be unbearable for them." The night of the gala, Ethan waited for Victoria in the museum lobby, perceiving the agitation around him. The murmur of conversations was momentarily interrupted when someone passed by him, followed by barely disguised whispers. He could feel the presence of his parents a few meters away, his mother probably scrutinizing his every move. When Victoria arrived, the subtle jasmine scent that always accompanied her announced her presence before any word. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hand. "How could you know?" She replied with a mixture of surprise and contained emotion. "I can feel how conversations stop when you enter. I can hear the whisper of the fabric of your dress as you move. I can perceive your confidence in the firmness of your hand." What Ethan couldn't see was the emerald green dress Victoria had chosen, sober but elegant, nor the way she had pulled her hair back in a low bun that accentuated her angular features. Nor could he see the looks of astonishment, curiosity, and in some cases barely disguised contempt that followed them as they moved through the hall. Margaret was the first to intercept them, with William following closely behind. "Ethan, what?" "Then some unexpected surprise," said the matriarch with a tense smile. "We didn't know you were bringing company." "Mother, father, may I introduce Victoria Sanders, literature professor at Boston University." Ethan made the introductions with deliberate formality. "Victoria, my parents, Margaret and William Morgan Walker." "A pleasure to meet you," replied Victoria with a dignity that Ethan could perceive in her voice. "Your son speaks wonderfully of you." The white lie made Ethan suppress a smile. The tension was palpable even for someone who couldn't see facial expressions. "Sanders?" asked William, as if examining the surname for connections. "Of the Sanders from New York?" "Of the Sanders from Maine, sir," Victoria replied simply. "My father is a history professor, and my mother works in community development." The silence that followed spoke more than any response. Ethan could perfectly imagine his father's expression, that mixture of bewilderment and disapproval he reserved for situations that escaped his control. The evening continued with a succession of similar introductions. Each new encounter reaffirmed what Ethan already knew. Victoria didn't fit into that world, and not because she lacked elegance or intelligence, but because she possessed an authenticity that was almost threatening to those who lived on carefully cultivated appearances. The defining moment came when Sebastian appeared. His brother had unexpectedly returned from his international tour, perhaps alerted by some urgent message from his parents. "Ethan!" exclaimed Sebastian, with that effusive tone he reserved for public occasions. What a pleasant surprise to see you here, and accompanied." Ethan immediately perceived the tension in his brother's voice, that slight tremor that revealed when Sebastian felt threatened but tried to disguise it. "Sebastian, this is Victoria Sanders," he said, squeezing her hand slightly. "Victoria, my brother Sebastian." "The famous Sebastian Morgan," replied Victoria, extending her hand. "Ethan has told me a lot about your achievements with the Foundation." Sebastian briefly shook her hand, and Ethan could almost visualize the calculating smile he would be displaying. "I hope he's only told you the good parts," replied Sebastian with a laugh that sounded hollow. "And how did you two meet? My brother has always been so reserved." "At the Foundation's anniversary gala," explained Victoria, "I found his articles on American poetry fascinating." "Articles?" Sebastian sounded genuinely confused. "Ethan, I didn't know you wrote." "There are many things you don't know about me, brother," replied Ethan with a calm smile. "After all, you decided years ago that it wasn't necessary to pay me too much attention." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with unspoken words and long-ignored resentments. Victoria gently squeezed Ethan's arm, a gesture of silent support that didn't go unnoticed by Sebastian. "I see you've found someone who understands you," Sebastian finally commented, with a tone that tried to be light, but couldn't hide a certain bitterness. "Congratulations, brother. It was time for you to come out of your shell." As Sebastian walked away through the crowd, Ethan felt a strange mixture of triumph and apprehension. He had just launched a silent challenge to years of family tradition, and the response wouldn't be long in coming. "Your brother is furious," whispered Victoria. "I've never seen someone smile with so much contained rage." "This is just the beginning," replied Ethan, mentally preparing himself for what would come. "Tonight we've altered the balance that my family has carefully maintained for decades." What neither of them could imagine was to what extent that night would mark a turning point, not only in their lives, but in the very fate of the Morgan Walker dynasty. The news spread through Boston's social circles with the speed of a wildfire in dry season. Ethan Morgan Walker, the relegated blind heir of the textile dynasty, was dating a university professor of humble origin. Rumors multiplied, increasingly extravagant, increasingly cruel. Some said Victoria was an opportunist who had seen in Ethan an easy path to the family fortune. Others, more malicious, insinuated that she was taking advantage of his blindness to manipulate him. "The Professor and the Blind Man, A Romance of Convenience," Jackson read aloud, holding one of the most popular society magazines. "Sir, things are going too far. There are photographs of you in the park, in restaurants." Ethan, seated in the study of his apartment in Beacon Hill, the only space his parents had granted him as his own, maintained a calm that contrasted with his assistant's indignation. "It was to be expected, Jackson," he replied, running his fingers over the braille pages of the book he was reading. "Have you heard anything from Victoria today?" Jackson hesitated a moment before responding. "She has received threats at the university, sir. Someone sent an anonymous email to the dean suggesting a review of her academic history for possible irregularities." Ethan closed the book abruptly, his serenity finally broken. "Are they investigating her background? For what reason?" "There is no real reason, sir," explained Jackson. "It's an attempt at intimidation. Miss Sanders has an impeccable record, but the mere fact of initiating an investigation could damage her reputation." Ethan stood up, walking with confidence through the space he knew perfectly. "This has Sebastian's signature," he murmured. "His specialty has always been destroying reputations from the shadows." The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Jackson answered and then, with a concerned expression that Ethan could perceive in his voice, passed him the receiver. "It's your father, sir." The conversation was brief and tense. William demanded his presence at the family mansion that same afternoon for an urgent matter that couldn't be discussed over the phone. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. When Ethan arrived at the family home in Beacon Hill, the atmosphere was oppressive. The mansion, which had always seemed cold to him despite its opulence, now felt like a trap. Jackson guided him to his father's office, where William, Margaret, and to his surprise, Sebastian, were already waiting for him. "Ethan, this has to end," were his father's first words without even a greeting. This relationship is affecting the family's image and putting important foundation projects at risk. Good morning to you too, father, replied Ethan with studied calm, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. What projects are at risk exactly? Several of our most important donors have expressed concern, Sebastian intervened with that voice that Ethan knew so well, the voice he used when pretending to be reasonable. The Foundation's image is crucial for our philanthropic work. Curious that you mention image, Sebastian, when what you really care about are the funds you regularly divert from those projects. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, almost palpable. What are you talking about? William's voice trembled slightly, a mixture of confusion and alarm. I've been more attentive than you all think, continued Ethan. I have friends in banks, on boards of directors, people who respect me beyond my surname or my condition, and they've noticed certain irregularities in the financial management of the Foundation since Sebastian took control. This is absurd. Sebastian's voice no longer sounded reasonable. Father, Ethan is trying to divert attention from the real problem. That woman is manipulating him. That woman has a name, interrupted Ethan, raising his voice slightly. Her name is Victoria Sanders, and she's the first person in years who sees me as something more than an inconvenience for this family. Son, Margaret intervened with that conciliatory tone she used in family crises. No one thinks you're an inconvenience. We simply worry about you. This woman, Victoria, says, what do we really know about her? She comes from such a different environment from ours. That's precisely why I admire her, mother, replied Ethan, because she's not contaminated by the hypocrisy and obsession with appearances that defines our social circle. William hit the desk with the palm of his hand, a gesture that Ethan recognized by the dry sound it produced. Enough of these diversions. The matter is simple, Ethan. You have two options. End this inappropriate relationship or face the consequences. What consequences exactly? Asked Ethan, although he already knew the answer. Your monthly allowance would be reconsidered, his father replied coldly, and we would have to evaluate the situation of your apartment, which, don't forget, is in the name of the family business. It was an ultimatum in every sense. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan felt that the safety net his family had, woven around him, more like a cage than protection, could disappear. I understand, he finally said, rising. You've made your position very clear. As Jackson guided him to the exit, Ethan could hear Sebastian following them to the vestibule. Ethan, wait, said his brother, catching up to them. It doesn't have to be like this. Be reasonable. This woman, whoever she is, isn't worth losing everything. Ethan stopped and turned towards his brother's voice. What is everything, Sebastian? An empty apartment, an allowance I barely use, a family that has treated me like an embarrassing secret since I was 12. You're being unfair. Sebastian's voice took on a defensive tone. We've always taken care of you, given you everything. You've given me everything except respect and a real place in this family, replied Ethan. And now that I finally find someone who values me for who I am, you try to take her away too. There was a tense silence before Sebastian responded, this time with a lower, almost threatening voice. Be careful, brother. You don't know who you're dealing with. Your professor isn't as perfect as you think. I have friends at the university who could dig up anything from her past. Is that a threat, Sebastian? It's brotherly advice, his brother replied. Sometimes it's better to settle for what you have. You have a comfortable, protected life. Don't risk it for a passing adventure. Ethan smiled humorlessly. That's your problem, Sebastian. You've always believed you can buy or manipulate everything and everyone, but there are people who have no price. That night, Ethan waited for Victoria in his apartment. He had asked Jackson to prepare an intimate dinner and then leave them alone. He needed to make a decision, and he couldn't do it without talking to her first. When Victoria arrived, Ethan immediately perceived that something wasn't right. Her breathing was irregular, and the sound of her steps lacked the confident cadence that characterized her. What happened? He asked, rising to receive her. They found irregularities in my student evaluations from last semester, she replied with a tense voice. The dean has asked me to take a leave while they investigate. It's ridiculous, Ethan. I've been teaching with the same evaluation system for years. Ethan guided her to the sofa, feeling how she trembled slightly. It's Sebastian, he said with certainty. He threatened me today, said he had friends at the university. Victoria remained silent for a moment before letting out a sigh. Your family won't stop, will they? She finally asked. They'll do whatever it takes to separate us. Today, they gave me an ultimatum, confessed Ethan, taking her hands in his. Either I end our relationship, or they cut off all financial support. Ethan, she began, but he gently interrupted her. I'm not finished, Victoria. Today I realized something important. Everything they could take from me means nothing compared to what I've found with you. With a determination that surprised even himself, Ethan knelt before her, seeking her hands. Victoria Sanders, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The silence that followed seemed eternal, until Ethan felt Victoria's tears falling on their intertwined hands. Are you sure? She asked with a broken voice. You would lose everything your family has worked for generations. No, Victoria, he replied, with a serene smile. I would gain my freedom and a life with the woman I love. That's worth more than any fortune. Ethan Morgan Walker and Victoria Sanders' wedding was as discreet as it was significant. A small ceremony in Cambridge with just a few friends as witnesses. Victoria's father, Henry Sanders, a man of few words but deep gaze, gave away his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Victoria's mother, Carol, a petite but strong-willed woman, observed everything with moist eyes, divided between joy for her daughter and fear of the consequences of defying a family as powerful as the Morgan Walkers. No member of Ethan's family attended. The invitation he sent to his parents was returned unopened. Sebastian, for his part, responded with an icy message. I hope you know what you're doing. There will be no going back. Despite everything, it was a day full of sincerity and genuine emotion. For Victoria, who described every detail of the place to Ethan, the white flowers decorating the small chapel seemed to shine with their own light. The music of the string quartet resonated with almost supernatural clarity, and when they exchanged vows, their words had the weight of a promise that went far beyond the ritual. I choose you, Ethan, not despite your blindness, but with it, because it's part of who you are, like your silences, your words, and your courage, said Victoria, her voice clear and firm. I choose you knowing this path won't be easy, but convinced it will be true. I choose you, Victoria, he responded with an emotion he rarely showed, because you taught me to see with my heart what my eyes never could. With you, for the first time, I'm not the blind heir, the relegated brother, or the uncomfortable son. I'm simply a man who has found his way in darkness. The celebration that followed in the backyard of the Sanders family home was full of laughter, music, and sincere conversations. It was a world so different from that of the Morgan Walkers, where each social event was a careful choreography of appearances and strategic connections. That night, as they danced under the paper lights decorating the yard, Victoria whispered in Ethan's ear, "Don't you miss anything from your previous life?" Ethan smiled, holding her closer. I miss the idea of a united family that I never really had, but I wouldn't trade this moment for all the luxuries in the world. The weeks that followed were an adjustment for both. Ethan had rejected the last financial allocation from his family, and as they had threatened, he received a notice to vacate the Beacon Hill apartment. Jackson, in an act of loyalty that Ethan would never forget, decided to follow him, accepting a considerable reduction in his salary. They temporarily settled in a small apartment near Boston University, while Victoria fought to recover her position at the university. The investigation into her evaluations was finally dismissed for lack of evidence, but the damage to her reputation was already done. Several colleagues looked at her with suspicion, and some students had requested a group change. I won't give them the satisfaction of seeing me defeated, Victoria declared one night, while correcting papers at the small dining table. If they want war, they'll have it. Ethan, seated across from her, smiled with admiration. He had discovered in his wife a strength that went far beyond what he had imagined. Where he had learned to adapt and survive in the shadows, Victoria had developed the ability to fight openly, without fear of what others might say. It was in these moments of apparent tranquility when unexpected news arrived. William Morgan Walker had suffered a stroke. He was stable, but doctors recommended absolute rest. The news came through Jackson, who maintained contact with the staff of the family mansion. "How serious is it?" asked Ethan, feeling a confusing mixture of emotions. "Quite serious, sir," replied Jackson. "Mr. William has lost mobility on the left side of his body and has difficulty speaking. Mrs. Margaret is devastated." "You should go see him," suggested Victoria, taking his hand. "Despite everything, he's still your father." Ethan hesitated. The relationship with his parents had been completely cut off since the wedding. He hadn't even received a birthday greeting the previous month. "I don't think they want to see me," he finally replied, "especially with my inadequate wife by my side." "You don't have to take me with you," Victoria said softly. "This is between your father and you." Something in Victoria's tone made him reflect. Despite everything they had done to separate them, despite the attempts to tarnish her name and ruin her career, she still had the generosity of spirit to suggest this reconciliation. The next day, Ethan visited the hospital accompanied only by Jackson. The reception was cold. Margaret barely addressed a few courteous words to him, and Sebastian didn't hide his surprise and disgust at seeing him enter the private room where William was recovering. "What are you doing here?" asked Sebastian with a tense voice. "Father needs tranquility, not more upsets." "I've come to see our father, Sebastian," replied Ethan calmly. "Nothing more." The visit was brief and painful. William, that man who had always projected strength and authority, lay diminished in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that emitted regular beeps. When Ethan approached and took his hand, he could feel a slight squeeze, the only acknowledgement his father could offer. "I'm here, Father," he said simply. "I'm sorry about what happened." As he was leaving the hospital, Sebastian caught up with him in the hallway. "This changes nothing," he said harshly. "You've chosen your path, Ethan. You've betrayed the family for that woman." "No, Sebastian," replied Ethan, maintaining his calm. "I haven't betrayed anyone. I've simply decided to live in truth, however difficult it may be. Something you might want to consider as well." "What are you insinuating?" Sebastian's voice took on a threatening tone. "You know exactly what I'm referring to," replied Ethan. "The diverted funds, the phantom donations, the projects that exist only on paper, all of that will come to light sooner or later." Sebastian let out a forced laugh. "You're delusional, brother. Blindness must be affecting your mind too." Ethan simply smiled, a calm smile that threw Sebastian off balance. "Time will tell. Meanwhile, I hope Father recovers soon." William's illness accelerated certain processes in the family structure. With the patriarch incapacitated, official control of the company and foundation formally passed to Sebastian, who had already been exercising de facto power for years. However, there were certain decisions, especially related to family assets, that required the firstborn's signature according to the original statutes of the company. A week after his visit to the hospital, Ethan received an unexpected call from Richard Donovan, the family lawyer who had handled the Morgan Walkers' legal affairs for 3 decades. "Mr. Ethan, we need to meet urgently," said the lawyer with a voice that tried to maintain professional neutrality. "There are documents that require your signature to authorize certain transactions in your father's absence." "What kind of transactions, Mr. Donovan?" asked Ethan, intrigued. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person if you don't mind," replied the lawyer. "It's a delicate matter." The meeting was scheduled for the following day at Mr. Donovan's office. Victoria insisted on accompanying him, despite Ethan's initial reluctance. "I don't trust anything that comes from your brother," she explained, "and I'm sure he's behind this sudden need for your signature." Mr. Donovan's office was in an old building in the historic downtown. The smell of old papers and polished wood filled the environment. Ethan, sensitive to these details since his blindness, felt transported to his childhood when he accompanied his father to these same offices. "Mr. Ethan, Mrs. Victoria," the lawyer greeted them formally. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." After the initial greetings, Mr. Donovan went straight to the point. "The situation is as follows," he explained, while Ethan listened to the sound of papers being unfolded on the desk. "With Mr. William incapacitated, there are certain pending transactions that require the signature of the firstborn, according to the original statutes of the company." "What kind of transactions?" asked Victoria before Ethan could speak. There was a moment of silence, as if the lawyer was evaluating to what extent he could be frank in front of her. "It's about the sale of the properties in Newport and Cape Cod," he finally replied. "The offers are excellent, well above market value." "Sale?" Ethan frowned. "Those properties have been in the family for generations. Father always refused to sell them, even when he received million-dollar offers." The lawyer uncomfortably cleared his throat. "I understand your surprise, Mr. Ethan, but circumstances have changed. The company needs liquidity for new projects, and with your father's situation..." "Who is the buyer?" Victoria interrupted again, her voice sharp as a knife. Another silence, longer this time. "Highcliffe Group," the lawyer finally answered. "A very respectable real estate development company." Victoria squeezed Ethan's hand under the table. He immediately understood. Highcliffe Group was known for its connections with certain politicians of dubious reputation and for its aggressive business practices. "And why such a hurry, Mr. Donovan?" asked Ethan. "These properties have been in our family for decades. Surely they can wait until my father recovers." "The buyer has set a deadline," explained the lawyer, increasingly uncomfortable. "The offer expires in a week." "Convenient," murmured Victoria, loud enough to be heard. Mr. Donovan cleared his throat again. "Mr. Ethan, I understand your reservations, but your brother Sebastian considers it an opportunity that can't be missed. The funds would be crucial for the Foundation's new expansion project." "Do you have the complete offer documents?" asked Ethan calmly. "I'd like my wife to review them." The lawyer hesitated a moment before responding. "Of course, but I should mention that these documents are confidential and..." "My wife has my complete trust, Mr. Donovan," interrupted Ethan firmly. "Either she reviews them or there's no signature." With evident reluctance, Mr. Donovan handed the documents to Victoria, who began to read them meticulously. While she read, Ethan perceived how the lawyer moved restlessly in his chair. Something didn't fit. This man, who had always been a model of professional composure, was notably nervous. "Mr. Donovan," Ethan suddenly said, "how long has my brother known about my exclusive right to sign these transactions?" The question seemed to take the lawyer by surprise, who took a moment to respond. "The statutes have always been clear on this matter, Mr. Ethan. The firstborn must authorize any sale of historical family properties." "That doesn't answer my question," insisted Ethan. Before the lawyer could respond, Victoria intervened. "Ethan, according to these documents, the properties would be sold at a price that, while high, is well below their real value considering recent developments in those areas," she said, her voice professional and analytical. "Moreover, there's a clause that mentions a separate agreement that isn't included here." The silence that followed was revealing. Mr. Donovan seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "I think we need more time to review this," Ethan finally said, standing up. "I won't sign anything today." "Mr. Ethan, the offer has a very strict deadline," insisted the lawyer. "Your brother is counting on this sale for..." "My brother will have to wait," cut in Ethan with a firmness that surprised even Victoria. "I'll inform you of my decision in a few days." As they left the office, Victoria guided Ethan down the hallway, whispering, "This is bigger than we imagined, Ethan. I think Sebastian is involved in something very shady with Highcliffe Group." "I know," he replied, "and I think I've just found my brother's Achilles heel." The quiet university library had become the operations center for Ethan and Victoria. Surrounded by ancient books and the aroma of old paper, they meticulously built the case against Sebastian and his shady dealings in the Morgan Foundation. "Highcliffe Group isn't just a real estate company," Victoria explained as she transcribed some documents into Braille so Ethan could review them. "It's a front for money laundering. They have ties to corrupt politicians and have been involved in several bribery scandals in recent years. Ethan ran his fingers over the pages, assimilating the information translated for him by his wife. "And you say you found regular transfers from the Foundation to Highcliffe Group subsidiaries?" he asked, frowning. "Exactly," replied Victoria. "Thanks to my colleague James from the Economics Department, we were able to trace 7 transfers in the last 3 years, all under the concept of strategic consultancies or feasibility studies. None of these services seem to have actually been provided. For weeks they had worked in silence, gathering evidence, connecting dots, building a solid case. Victoria used her academic contacts, while Ethan leveraged relationships he had, discreetly cultivated over the years, with people who respected him beyond his surname or condition. Most surprising for both was discovering they weren't alone in this search. People within the family company itself, tired of Sebastian's questionable practices, began to leak valuable information to them through Jackson. "Mr. Cooper from accounting gave me this today," said Jackson one afternoon, placing a USB drive in Victoria's hands. "He says they're copies of fake invoices for services never rendered. He's been saving this information for years, waiting for the right moment." The investigation took an unexpected turn when Richard Donovan, the family lawyer, requested to meet with them in secret. The appointment was set at a discreet cafe in Brookline, away from curious eyes. "Mr. Ethan, Mrs. Victoria," greeted the lawyer, visibly nervous. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "To what do we owe this sudden need for discretion, Mr. Donovan?" asked Ethan, perceiving the tension in the lawyer's voice. Mr. Donovan took a sip of his coffee before responding. "I've served the Morgan Walker family for over 30 years, he began, his voice barely audible. "Your grandfather, Mr. Charles, was a man of integrity who built a textile empire respected throughout America. Your father, despite his rigidity, always kept the company within the bounds of legality." He paused as if it cost him to continue. "But what Mr. Sebastian is doing," his voice broke slightly, "this goes beyond aggressive business strategies. He's putting the entire family legacy at risk." "Why are you telling us this now?" asked Victoria, suspicious. "A few weeks ago you were pressuring Ethan to sign those sales documents." The lawyer lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I was afraid, Mrs. Victoria. Your brother has powerful connections." He directed these last words to Ethan. "But after our meeting, I received a visit from some representatives of Highcliffe Group. They weren't subtle in their threats." He extracted a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "Here's everything you need to know about the real purpose of selling the properties in Newport and Cape Cod. They're not just lands. They contain water reserves that Highcliffe Group plans to privatize, and your brother would receive a multi-million-dollar commission that doesn't appear in any official document." This revelation was just the beginning. In the days that followed, more people began to talk. Former Foundation employees, suppliers, even old friends of Sebastian who had been betrayed or marginalized when they were no longer useful. The picture that formed was darker than they had imagined. Sebastian had turned the Morgan Foundation into a vehicle for his personal ambitions and dubious connections. While projecting the image of a committed philanthropist, he diverted funds, inflated project costs, and used the family reputation to open doors that he later exploited for his own benefit. "It's worse than we thought," said Ethan one night, as Victoria read him the latest documents they had obtained. "He's been doing this for years, right under our parents' noses." Victoria took his hand, squeezing it gently. "The question is, what do we do with all this information?" The answer came unexpectedly. Margaret Morgan Walker, Ethan's mother, requested to see him in secret. The meeting was arranged at the house of an old family friend, a discreet woman who had always had a special affection for Ethan. When Ethan arrived, accompanied by Victoria and Jackson, he found his mother visibly deteriorated. Her voice, usually firm and controlled, sounded tired, almost defeated. "My son," said Margaret, taking Ethan's hands in hers, "forgive me for not being by your side when you needed me most." Ethan, surprised by this unusual gesture of vulnerability, didn't know what to respond immediately. "Mother, what's happening? How is father?" Your father is stable but not improving, she replied sadly. The doctors say he may never fully recover his speech. She paused as if gathering strength. But I haven't called you for that, Ethan. I've called you because I've finally opened my eyes. Margaret proceeded to tell him how, after William's illness, she had begun to get more involved in company and foundation affairs. At first, Sebastian had tried to keep her on the sidelines, but she, with the determination that characterized her, had insisted on reviewing documents, attending meetings, understanding the workings of the empire her husband had directed for decades. What I've discovered has devastated me, son, she confessed, her voice breaking. Sebastian has betrayed everything your father and grandfather built. He has used the Morgan Walker name too. She couldn't continue, choked by emotion. We know, Mother, said Ethan gently. We've been gathering evidence for weeks. Margaret then turned to Victoria, really looking at her for the first time. You've been helping my son, haven't you? We've worked together, Ma'am, replied Victoria with dignity. Your son is an extraordinary man who deserves to reclaim the place that belongs to him. To everyone's surprise, Margaret extended her hand toward Victoria. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Morgan, she said, using the family surname to address her for the first time. I judged you without knowing you, based on absurd prejudices. This moment of unexpected reconciliation was interrupted by the arrival of an urgent message. Jackson, who received it, visibly paled. Sir, Mrs. Margaret, he said with a tense voice, Mr. Sebastian has called a press conference for tomorrow. He will officially announce the sale of the Newport and Cape Cod properties to Highcliffe Group. And also, he hesitated a moment, he will also announce a restructuring of the foundation that would eliminate the need for the firstborn's signature for any future transactions. How can he do that? Asked Victoria, alarmed. The statutes are clear. He has prepared a modification, explained Jackson, and he plans to use a power of attorney that Mr. Williams signed before his stroke to validate it. Margaret brought a hand to her chest, visibly affected. William would never do that voluntarily, she murmured. Sebastian must have deceived him somehow. Ethan remained, silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, with a determination that surprised everyone, he stood up. Jackson, I need you to summon all our allies, he said firmly. Mr. Donovan, Mr. Cooper from accounting, the former employees who have spoken with us, everyone. What are you planning, son? Asked Margaret, confused. Ethan smiled, a smile that combined determination and a certain sadness. We're going to attend that press conference, Mother, he replied, and we're going to tell our version of the story. The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Victoria and Ethan, with the help of Jackson and now also Margaret, organized all the documents, testimonies, and evidence they had gathered. They contacted trusted journalists, people who valued truth above sensationalism. They prepared copies of the most important documents, making sure to have backups in various formats. It won't be easy, warned Victoria as they worked into the late hours of the night. Your brother has powerful connections, and the press can be manipulated. I know, replied Ethan, but we have something he doesn't have. What's that? She asked. The truth, Ethan said simply. And we also have something he will never understand. People who support us not out of self-interest, but out of conviction. That night, as they prepared to sleep the few hours that remained before dawn, Ethan took Victoria's hands in his. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said with a serene voice, I want you to know that I regret nothing. Choosing you has been the best decision of my life. Victoria hugged him tightly, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. I'm afraid, Ethan, she confessed. Not for myself, but for you. You've lived protected all your life, and now you'll face your brother publicly. I won't be alone, he replied, caressing her face. I have you, and for the first time in a long time, I also have my mother on my side. And most importantly, we have the truth with us. Truth with... That night, as Victoria slept beside him, Ethan remained awake, mentally preparing for the day that would define not only his future, but the entire legacy of the Morgan Walker family. For the first time since losing his sight, he felt he could clearly see the path he must follow. The auditorium of the prestigious Millennium Hotel buzzed with activity that morning. Sebastian Morgan Walker had carefully chosen the setting for his big announcement. An elegant hall with capacity for more than 100 journalists and special guests, decorated with the corporate colors of Morgan Enterprises and the Foundation. On the stage, an imposing family logo presided over the scene, a symbol of the power and tradition the Morgan Walkers had built for generations. Behind the scenes, Sebastian reviewed his speech one last time, flanked by Highcliffe Group executives and carefully selected image consultants. His impeccable suit, rehearsed smile and confident posture projected the image of a visionary business leader, ready to take the family legacy to new heights. "Everything is ready, Mr. Sebastian," his assistant informed him. "The room is full, and journalists from the main media outlets are already seated in the front row." Sebastian nodded with satisfaction. This would be his defining moment, the culmination of years of carefully calculated maneuvers, with the Newport and Cape Cod properties sold to Highcliffe Group and the statutes modified to eliminate the need for the firstborn signature. He would finally have absolute control over the Morgan Walker empire. The inconvenience of his blind brother would definitely be in the past. What Sebastian didn't expect was the commotion that began to form in the hotel lobby. Ethan Morgan Walker, guided by Victoria and accompanied by Margaret Jackson, Mr. Donovan, and a group of people that included former trusted employees, ex-executives of the Foundation, and journalists from independent media, advanced with determination toward the auditorium. "I'm sorry, sir," said one of the security guards blocking the way. "This is a private event." It was Margaret who stepped forward, drawing herself up with all the dignity of the Morgan Walker matriarch. "I am Margaret Morgan Walker," she said firmly. "And this is my son, Ethan Morgan Walker, firstborn and legitimate heir of the family. I demand that we be allowed to enter immediately." The guard, disconcerted by the presence of Sebastian's mother, hesitated long enough for Mr. Donovan to intervene. "According to the statutes of Morgan Enterprises, Mr. Ethan has every right to be present at any official announcement related to family assets," he explained with professional authority. "Denying him entry would constitute a violation of his legal rights as a majority shareholder." The confusion created a breach that the group exploited to advance toward the auditorium. When they entered, the presentation was about to begin. Sebastian, already at the podium, momentarily froze at the sight of his brother, his mother, and the strange entourage accompanying them. Camera flashes began to fire with renewed frenzy. The unexpected presence of the family matriarch and the blind firstborn, who rarely appeared at public events, was news in itself. With admirable professionalism, Sebastian quickly regained his composure and continued with his opening speech, though his eyes remained fixed on the group now settling into vacant seats in the front row. "Distinguished guests, media representatives, friends all," he began, with a firm voice. "Today is a historic day for Morgan Enterprises and our foundation. With the painful absence of my father, William, who is still recovering, it falls to me to announce a new era of expansion and modernization for our company." While Sebastian spoke about strategic vision, innovative alliances, and international projection, Ethan listened attentively, perceiving the nuances in his brother's voice, that slight tremor that revealed nervousness beneath apparent confidence. When Sebastian formally announced the sale of the properties to Highcliffe Group, presenting it as a strategic alliance to develop ecologically responsible tourist complexes, Ethan knew it was time to act. "I have a question," he said with a clear and firm voice, standing with Victoria's help. The auditorium fell silent. Sebastian stopped mid-sentence, visibly disconcerted. "Ethan, I'm glad you're here," he improvised, trying to maintain control. "But we're in the middle of a formal presentation. We can talk privately afterward." "I think what I have to say will interest everyone present," insisted Ethan, his voice projecting with an authority that surprised many, "especially considering that these properties cannot be sold without my signature, according to the original statutes of the family business." A murmur ran through the room. The journalists, sensing they were witnessing something more than a simple corporate announcement, began to pay renewed attention. "That has been modified," Sebastian quickly replied. "We have a notarized power of attorney signed by our father before his illness a power that was never intended for this purpose," Mr. Donovan intervened, standing up next to Ethan. "As the family lawyer for 3 decades, I can testify that William Morgan Walker never intended to authorize the sale of these historic properties, nor to modify the statutes to marginalize his firstborn." The tension in the room was palpable. Sebastian, increasingly nervous, tried to regain control. "This is inappropriate and will be dealt with privately," he said, signaling to security. "Please, let's continue with our presentation. Is it inappropriate to question why the Morgan Foundation has transferred more than $5 million to Highcliffe Group subsidiaries in the last 3 years?" asked Victoria, standing up, next to her husband. "Or why there are charitable projects that only exist on paper, but have received millions in funding?" The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Journalists began taking notes frantically, while photographers aimed their cameras at the stage where Sebastian visibly paled. It was then that Margaret Morgan Walker rose, with all the elegance and authority that had always characterized her. Silence was immediate. "As matriarch of the Morgan Walker family and principal shareholder in my husband's absence," she said firmly, "I must inform you that any negotiation with Highcliffe Group is suspended until a complete and independent audit of our companies and the foundation is conducted." Sebastian, discomposed, attempted one last desperate maneuver. "Mother, you don't understand what's at stake here," he said, his voice losing its previous confidence. "These are complex business decisions that—" "What I understand," Margaret interrupted coldly, "is that you've betrayed your father's trust, manipulated your family, and put at risk the legacy that 4 generations built with integrity." The final blow was delivered by Ethan, who advanced toward the stage with Victoria's help. His presence, erect and dignified despite his blindness, dramatically contrasted with Sebastian's increasingly discomposed image. "We have documents, testimonies and evidence of every questionable transaction, every diversion of funds and every abuse of power," announced Ethan with a clear voice. "We are not looking for scandals or revenge, but for justice and transparency. The true legacy of the Morgan Walkers is not their properties or fortune, but the values of integrity and service that my grandfather and father tried to instill in us." He turned toward where he perceived his brother's presence. "Sebastian, there's still time to do the right thing," he said with a mixture of firmness and compassion. "Cooperate with the investigation, take responsibility, and help us rebuild what you've damaged." Journalists rushed toward the stage in a stampede, bombarding with questions. Highcliffe Group executives discreetly slipped away toward the side exits. In the midst of chaos, Sebastian Morgan Walker, the brilliant heir who had been groomed for success since childhood, collapsed before everyone's eyes, his carefully constructed facade crumbling like a house of cards. The following weeks were a whirlwind of events. The media dubbed the scandal the Morgan case, and for days it was the main topic in newscasts, newspapers, and magazines. The independent audit confirmed what Ethan and Victoria had discovered: years of irregular management, diversion of funds, and abuse of foundation resources. Sebastian, cornered by the evidence, finally confessed his responsibility, though he tried to minimize it by blaming market pressures and common practices in the sector. The board of directors of Morgan Enterprises, in an emergency meeting chaired by Margaret, removed him from all his positions. To the surprise of many, Ethan didn't seek revenge. Instead of pressing criminal charges against his brother, he proposed an agreement. Sebastian would return the embezzled funds, resign his shares in the company, and accept voluntary exile, establishing himself abroad away from the spotlight. "Why did you let him go?" Victoria asked him one night as they rested in the garden of the family mansion, where they now lived along with Margaret. "After everything he did to you, how he tried to destroy us." Ethan smiled with a serenity that had been maturing in him during the months of struggle. "Revenge doesn't restore sight to a blind man, Victoria," he replied softly. "Nor does it build solid companies or repair reputations. Sebastian has already lost what he valued most: his public image, the respect of his peers, the trust of the family. Punishing him further would be unnecessary." A month after the scandal, William Morgan Walker showed significant signs of improvement. Although his recovery would be slow and incomplete, the doctors were optimistic. Most surprising was his reaction upon hearing what had happened. A silent tear rolled down his cheek when Ethan told him how he had discovered the truth and protected the family legacy. With a trembling hand, William took his firstborn's hand and squeezed it with a strength that surprised everyone. It was his way of communicating what words could no longer express: recognition, respect, and perhaps, for the first time, a glimmer of paternal pride toward that son he had always considered a weak link in the family chain. The restructuring of Morgan Enterprises and the foundation was deep and meticulous. Ethan, with Victoria's unconditional support, implemented a more horizontal and transparent management model. The Newport and Cape Cod properties were not only kept in the family, but parts of them were converted into educational and cultural centers open to local communities. Victoria, for her part, returned to the university with a strengthened position. The scandal had also exposed those who tried to tarnish her academic reputation, and the new dean offered her the leadership of an innovative program that linked humanities with corporate social responsibility. The social circles that had once rejected Victoria for her inadequate appearance or humble origin now flattered and imitated her. She observed this hypocrisy with a mixture of irony and compassion. "It's fascinating how perceptions change," she commented one night as they prepared to attend a charity gala. "Now it turns out my style is sophisticated and avant-garde, according to the same magazines that called me strange and unfeminine." Ethan smiled, adjusting his tie with the skill he had developed over the years. "The world has always been that way, darling," he replied. "The difference is that now we can see it clearly and choose our own path." The true victory for both wasn't the headlines nor the public rehabilitation, not even the recovery of business control. It was that intimate moment, 6 months after the scandal, when they installed a small Braille library in one wing of the foundation, where visually impaired children could access quality literature and education. As Ethan browsed the shelves, touching the spines of the carefully selected books, Victoria observed him with a mixture of love and admiration. "You know what's most ironic about all this?" he said, perceiving her presence. "That it took 35 years for me to understand that my blindness wasn't a limitation, but a different way of seeing the world." "And what do you see now, Ethan?" she asked, approaching to take his hand. He smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I see an opportunity to build a different legacy," he replied, "not based on power or appearance, but on truth and inclusion. Her legacy where differences are not hidden, but celebrated." Victoria's response was a soft kiss, one of those intimate gestures they had learned to share away. From curious eyes, even now that they were at the center of public attention. That night, as they returned home under the starry Boston sky, Ethan reflected on the extraordinary journey they had undertaken together. From being the relegated heir, hidden in the shadows of his own family, he had become a respected leader, not for his surname, but for his actions and values. And it had all begun with the courage of a woman who saw in him what no one else had, bothered to look for, his true essence beyond the physical darkness that enveloped him. "The sky is incredible tonight," commented Victoria as the car advanced along Commonwealth Avenue. "There are stars everywhere, as if someone had scattered diamonds on black velvet." "Describe it to me," Ethan asked, as he had so many other times. And so, as Victoria painted the beauty of the firmament with words, Ethan confirmed what he already knew, that true vision doesn't depend on the eyes but on the heart, and that love, authentic love, is that which allows us to see beyond appearances, beyond prejudices, beyond even the deepest darkness. In a world obsessed with images, they had discovered that the most enduring beauty is that which cannot be photographed. The dignity of remaining true to oneself, the courage to defend truth, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes it's necessary to lose sight in order to really begin to see. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Victoria's story has moved you as much as it moved us in creating it. This journey through shadows to light reminds us that true vision goes beyond what our eyes can perceive. To continue exploring stories that challenge our perceptions and touch the heart, we've prepared a special collection of dramas that break, with traditional stereotypes. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story of love, dignity, and redemption resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring new narratives that explore the complexity of the human soul, family relationships, and the transformative power of true love. What other stories would you like to hear? What characters would you like to meet in future dramas? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice is important to us, and together we can create a new type of narrative that not only entertains, but also inspires and transforms.